Okay, I'm going to call the meeting of the Lawndale City Council special meeting to order and ask the city clerk to give us a roll call. Madam City Clerk.
Okay, good evening. Mayor Pro Tem Kearney.
Here.
Councilmember Suarez.
Here.
Councilmember Hoffman-Gorman.
Here.
Councilmember Cuevas.
Here.
Mayor Pullen Miles.
Here.
All are present.
Thank you, Madam. Next on our schedule, I'm going to ask Mr. Pro Tem Kearney to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Please stand, put your right hand over your heart, and repeat along with me. I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
Next item is oral communications. Is there any that would like to speak to this body on oral communications? Seeing none in the audience, I'm going to close oral communications as well as comments from the council. And we're going to bring up to our first presentation is item number 1, consideration of public arts program. That's at the staff report.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of the City Council. Before we get into the reports by both Sean and Julian, I just wanted to tee this up a little bit. We've asked for this special meeting tonight, and thank you, by the way, for agreeing to this meeting. But we've asked for this meeting so that we could spend a little bit of time on these two items that have come up in discussion by the council over the last year or so. So when it comes to the public arts program, of course, this is something that the city has looked at over time, the last few years. There's actually a policy in place, and this preceded me. I'm not exactly sure what happened with that policy, but it has not been implemented. So we wanted to bring this back for this council, considering the fact that there's a few new council members, a couple new council members, to give you a chance to provide some further input on it, and hopefully we'll get some direction from you and come up with a new, hopefully, public arts program for the city. The other item regarding parkways, as I understand it, this is an item that comes up from time to time, maybe once a year or every couple of years. Having seen that, this already came up one time since I've been here. It came up last year. I thought it would be worthwhile for the council and staff to try to work on something together that maybe we can come up with a new policy where it could be somewhat simplified to the point where we can encourage improvements to be done in our parkways that would help beautify the city and make it so that it's not cumbersome and not complicated for our residents. And hopefully it'll be a policy that will, be lasting over time, and we won't have to revisit this for at least a couple years, maybe longer. So we'll see how that goes. So with that, I'm going to invite Sean first to start his presentation on arts in public places.
Thank you. Good evening, Mr. Mayor and Council and members of the audience. So the item we have for you for consideration is the public arts program. We're seeking direction from the City Council, and as the Council is well aware, public arts improve the quality of life for the community, promotes cultural understanding, and embraces public health, stimulates economic development, and creates spaces for all to enjoy. Currently, the city, as Kevin mentioned, does not have a public arts ordinance that addresses specific public art or murals throughout the city. However, the city has operated since 2006 on a policy adopted by the City Council back in 2006. More recently, however, the Council adopted a development impact fee study, which also included arts in public places. When developers come in and develop properties throughout the city, there's a small fee attached related to help fund for public arts in public art in public places. In addition to that, the city recently has been working. We've had issues throughout the last couple of years where issues with murals have come up. Also placement of public art from community, as well as murals and paintings and mural type paintings on walls both private businesses and in public areas that we've come into contact with over the last few years. What staff has put together a general list of items for discussion tonight for consideration and possible direction to the city staff. So one thing to consider is location of public art in residential areas. That's come up because residents have asked about that. Placement of art in both commercial and industrial areas within both public and private areas. That's been a topic as well. Temporary public art is something else to consider. Art in public spaces like parks and other city-owned property. That's something to consider. And art on public utility boxes, box art it's commonly referred to. I know that's come up over the years. People have come into the department and the community development asked about that. Establishment and placement of development regulations for murals. And now we do not have something specific for that, and that's happened on some of the commercial areas in the city where some folks have businesses on their private property have put murals up and whatnot. Establishment and review and approval process for public art. We do not have an ordinance that regulates how we process public art applications and whatnot and application fees. And then finally, development of a public arts plan in order to identify specific areas for the placement of public art throughout the city. That would be like on public property and whatnot. Now, there are some challenges with public art. In my previous jurisdictions, I actually mentioned to Kevin, I've worked in public art, public places, and it can be controversial, and it can be challenging and political as well. So one of the things to consider is proliferation of murals throughout the city, especially if the council wanted to allow it on businesses or whatnot rather than public areas. Establish an establishment approval process that's not too cumbersome and bureaucratic for stakeholders. Because the Public Arts Committee, they're a little bit less wanting to have all the bureaucracy that's attached to that. They would something more simplified process so folks can come to the city and apply for public art. Public involvement in the process, that's key. That's something that can get very controversial. And this has happened in my previous jurisdiction where people have been dissatisfied with the approval of some public art. I still get calls about some of the things that were approved. Difficulty in developing various types of public art, that can be very challenging. Development public art for children. One thing that I mentioned to Kevin, we worked at where you allow chalk. Children come in and to chalk up the city hall area. So that sometimes that can be controversial. People complain about it, blocking the access to City Hall. But it is a fun event too. Those are sometimes can be controversial. The other thing to consider, especially with murals, constitutional constraints on content of murals. That can get really political, and it can get, I don't want to speak for the legal folks, but our city attorney's office, but that can be very challenging as well. And then limitations on areas for placement of public art. As you know, Lawndale's built out. Most of our development is built out, most of our areas in the city, so it could be challenging. We do have opportunities throughout the city to place public art, obviously, but in some of the private areas and stuff, that may be challenging. And it is potentially controversial. With this proposal, if the council directs staff to move forward with some kind of ordinance or policy, revised policy, we don't anticipate any fiscal impacts. As I mentioned, the city took the first step in developing a fund with the diff fund to relate to development, so we have a way to develop, get fees in for the public art and public places. This concludes staff's report. Staff's requesting that the city council provide direction to city staff on development of a policy or an ordinance for public art.
Thank you for that report. So I guess we can begin a discussion on there's a lot of ways we can do this if it's the desire of this body in terms of outlining a program, an arts program. I would just give you a little historical, 2006, not really history, but the idea behind this arts program initially was to use arts not just a way of beautifying the community, but as an economic development tool as well. When I took a look at particularly the city of Cerritos, the model city, they have a number of pieces of art in public places. And it was another city, I can't think of off the top of my head, and there was a whole write-up on, I believe it was the Western magazine as well, about how public art can actually be an economic development tool or what have you. And that was really what we was trying to get to. Understanding that, it could be controversial or some art or what have you. But some of these other cities like Cerritos, somehow they're able to make it happen and make it work for them. So there is ways that you can make it work for the city. Initially, we had, as you see in the staff report, the body that would take a review of these art was the beautification committee. And it just seemed like it was a natural fit, at least at the time, for the beautification committee to take a look at the art proposals or what have you, and decide whether or not it was fitting for the committee or what have you, and whether or not they had the final say. That part we hadn't flushed out, whether it would be the city manager or the city council, but the initial review would be the beautification committee. It may not necessarily be advantageous for us to have the beautification committee do it at this point, or maybe so. Maybe we can stick with that. I'm not necessarily married to that, but I do believe that we should have some type of public review body before it's approved by the city manager's office or the council or whomever. You spoke about the trust fund on page one of these pages. Well, it says page 2 of this policy. It talks about Arts and Public Places Trust Fund. You're correct with the development fees. We did that recently, adopted development fees where a percentage of the cost for your permits or what have you will go towards the Arts and Public Places program, which should have been activated really in 2006, because as you can see in the staff report, it calls for a trust fund to be developed, which we just not getting around to doing. So, right, had we fully adopted the trust fund portion, which I had no idea that we had not fully executed, we probably have a few dollars in that account now. But nonetheless, we're moving ahead, and I'd just like to take everybody's opinion on to see what we want to do with this, how we want to shape this policy and revamp the existing policy. So anybody want to speak on it? Yes, ma'am.
This is
Tell
Deshawn.
me.
I think I know the answer to this question, but I'd like to hear it from you because things might have changed. Back in about the 2006 era, we had some art placed at a school that inundated the mayor at that time, my dad, his telephone. The neighbors were just upset about it. When we're talking about a policy, are we talking about a policy that can have some jurisdiction over that as well, or are schools still, they can do what they want to on their sides of their walls?
Yes, the schools would be exempt from city regulations and policies and whatnot.
Okay, that's what I knew back then it was, and I didn't know if anything had changed.
Councilwoman Bernadette Suarez?
I just have a question with regards to, I guess, freedom of speech and how that plays into if someone wants to put something that has possibly a political message and we say, no, we don't want anything controversial. Are there repercussions? Could they legally fight us? I guess this is a question for a city attorney.
Sure. The answer is probably yes. There are some limitations. For example, the city has the right, the 5 of you, as the elected representatives of the city, have the right to set up a program that limits what kind of art can be put on your city property. So if you want to limit art on city property to art that you choose, you have every right to do that. If you set up, and Mr. Moore mentioned a mural program, if you set up a mural program, that might be a little bit tougher. Even a mural program that is supposed to be focused on the history and culture of the city could wind up with pieces of it that are offensive to some members of the community. So that's something to think about as you're deciding what types of programs, what types of public art do you want to bring in. Because if it's on private property, they have a lot of rights. They have a lot of rights to do what they want on their property. You are certainly allowed to discriminate against commercial speech and, for example, not allow murals to go up that are commercial in nature, essentially advertisements that you otherwise wouldn't allow. But once it comes to non-commercial speech, you have to be very careful in what we do. So whatever direction you give tonight, if you want to have a program go one direction or another, Mr. Moore and I will take it. I'll run it past some of our First Amendment experts. He'll run it through what he knows, and then we'll come back to you with, our best ability to meet your goals in terms of what kind of public art you want to see. But yes, absolutely, ma'am. When you open things up to art, you always open them up to the chance of a First Amendment suit.
Yes, ma'am.
So in other words, in public art, if I'm understanding this correctly, like when you're out in the city of Bellflower and under the underpasses, you're seeing their logo and things like that. That is all considered community art, right?
Would that be on Caltrans jurisdiction? And Kevin and I have talked to Caltrans about that, but I guess that would be considered some public art.
And so
But
then,
when they work with Caltrans on that, that'd be their jurisdiction as well.
so then my next thought is, I know we have talked about a communications person. I think that somewhere along the lines, before we got too far into drafting something for community art, we ought to be considering that logo that we have been discussing for a few months and getting help with the city logo so that everything wasn't our city seal, that our city emblem is used more for a formal versus something less formal.
You talking about our logo, part of the South Bay or our local area? I forgot what you're talking about.
Well, when we were discussing it a couple of months ago, we talked about coming up with a city quote logo that we would be identifying with, such as Downey uses the big D, and Lomita, as we just came back from Contract Cities, is its whole name, but it's the way it's written that is identified as their logo versus the seal that to a lot of people is a more formal. And I would like to see us have an idea of where we're heading towards on a quote logo of identifier so that it can be put into some community art.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, just to respond to that comment, we can certainly do that. We're in the process of setting out an RFP to hire a communications consultant, and once the consultant is on board, that's something that we can certainly look at and work with the council on. But if I could, also wanted to piggyback on the comments from Bernadette, your comments, and then Greg's response. I guess therein lies the problems, potential problems with art and specifically with murals. It's one of those things where if the council decides to approve murals, then it's hard to pick and choose which ones, where you might want to approve a mural, and in a case where you might not want to, you're pretty limited in terms of being able to deny something like that. So it becomes hard for the city to pick and choose, and then it also becomes difficult in terms of limiting the type of content. So, for example, I'll just use what came up several months ago with Kobe Bryant's death anniversary and the mural that was that started to be painted on the barbershop wall. Kobe is a much beloved sports figure in LA, represents a lot to a lot of people, championships, great basketball. But for some others, it could represent something else from his past. And so, on one hand, it could be a mural that's much supported, but on the other hand, it could be something that other people find offensive or take offense to. So if we allow one business to put up a mural, we would be hard pressed as staff to, disallow another mural elsewhere because maybe, that the message of that mural may not be accepted by the community. So it just makes for a difficult situation. So I just wanted to make sure that the council understood that, sure, murals sound like a good thing. It could, add to the beauty of the community, but at the same time, it becomes hard to limit. The other part of that is if the council does choose to allow murals, then there's the other item that Sean mentioned, which is proliferation. And that's a decision for the council to make. If you allow murals, potentially you could see murals on every other commercial building on Hawthorne Boulevard. And is that what you would like to see for this community? So that's just another thing to think about.
Yeah, for me, on the mural part, you mentioned the proliferation of murals. Of course, we can regulate how many murals we will allow in the city. So to me, that's not a big problem. If we decide to do murals, we can decide how many. So we can regulate how many murals will be in the city. The biggest issue is the one that you outlined is the content, more so than how many. It's easier to regulate. We decide 4 murals and 1 in each quadrant is enough. We can do that, or whatever the magic number is. But the content is a little more challenging. And when you have characters or actors, not actors in the traditional sense, but it's based on people or what have you, then that gets a little more tricky as opposed to something that's just more abstract or it's not based on a personality figure or what have you. I would recommend that when we get to recommendations, that if we do have murals, that we not allow the representation of personalities. That way you won't get into, well, we like this person, but we don't like that person, what have you. But if it's just art, it's a little harder to make that, that argument that this person has a bad reputation that we don't want to be affiliated with, or in some cases, some people may say, we do want to be affiliated with it, I'm okay with it, or what have you. And we can eliminate that by not allowing the personage of people. Just my thoughts on the mural part. If we're going to do murals, at all. Yes,
I do. I understand what you're saying, Robin. I agree with you on the mural. I like the utility boxes because Redondo does that. If you go down by the green line, you'll see it all down there. We can put it in part of the center, maybe we can put lawn, or whatever we have to do there. I like on our own property, I'm okay with. I got several phone calls a few months back about a movement on a fence on 167th and Condon. I had neighbors on both streets calling in. Yeah.
I'm
You know what I'm talking
referring to that.
about? Yeah, well, I had
Yes.
2 different neighbors, one on each street, different movement per se, complain about this. I don't think we should allow those in there. I mean, I'm all for movements, but you're gonna start animosity against neighborhoods and neighborhoods. So I'm good with the box art and public art, and the kids program, we did that at Food Art Park, remember that? We did the little, what do you call it, slate to put into the wall?
The tiles.
The tile, that's it, thank you. The tile, yeah. Yeah. But I don't, murals kind of scare me. I mean, the Kobe Bryant and his daughter was fine. I like that because he is a celebrity, but he also had some luggage with him. And I don't want to see anything like that. Like you said, one hand was left hand is doing, right hand's doing. And we don't like this, we don't like that. But box art and our property, I'm good with.
And I like the utility boxes as well. Matter of fact, there was some time ago, we were supposed to be painting some utility boxes.
Remember that?
Had some funding, but
Yeah.
for some reason it didn't happen. to this day, I still don't understand why that was such a big issue, because it has worked wonderfully in many communities. In fact, when you paint or do art on the utility boxes, they're less likely to get vandalized and have graffiti, you know, and so I'm for utility boxes. Go ahead, Ron.
I would be okay with utility boxes, but I would want them to make sense, either all be, so that they were all about the same purpose, or, you know, if it was city, like you said, something that was similar to each other, or you could put them together and they somewhat told a story. Something like like a quilt would do. You can look at it and go, oh wow, this one, yeah, they have a common theme to them. That's what I would like to see.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm okay with murals, but if we could put a limit to it, and like, I do agree, no characters, either movie characters or actual person, and artsy, not political or anything like that, like, I don't know, sunshine, or, you know, very artsy, not anything political or a person. I do like the idea of the boxes being painted. Maybe it could be a program that we could run it with the school district, or have our youth, our YAC kids present something to us as part of their art. And then I do like the little tiles, again, if we could do them for our properties.
I have a
Yes,
comment.
yes, ma'am.
There's also, we could also do probably even temporary murals, where maybe they only go up for a certain number of days, and then, you know, after that, it needs to get painted over or something.
Yeah, I agree with that.
To Councilmember Suarez's idea, one thing, and it's not in California, but I have seen, and I'm willing to look at it, and I'll work with Mr. Moore on it. It's something that's actually on city property, and it's sort of what you might see at a college. It's sort of a revolving mural wall, where somebody will be able to put up their message for 30 or 60 days, then it comes down and a new one goes up. And in that way, yes, you're going to get some political messages, but they'll be short-termed, and it'll be known that they're short-term because they'll only get 30 or 60 days, and then the next message goes up, which helps to sort of moderate or mitigate the concern about the First Amendment, because you might not get what you love, but it'll be out of the way pretty soon. And if we did that, it's obviously something we're going to present to you and see whether you like it. Yes, ma'am.
Oh, a quick question. If during certain maybe election cycles, is it possible to not have any murals during those time periods? Since technically speaking, I mean, depending on where it is, you can't even have it near election sites.
Right. If we get direction to investigate this, we'll come back with the strongest possible limitations that we think you can put on it, and then you all can decide whether you want to move forward with it or not. But yeah, absolutely, that would be something I would want to consider for you, ma'am.
If I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
With regards to Bernadette's idea, are we able to charge a certain fee to have their art presented, or is it part of that 1% that we are charging?
We can certainly look into it.
But it's not part of the 1%. The 1% is what's imposed on developers.
On development, okay.
And then the money goes into a trust fund, and the city, let's say on our own initiative, can use the money from the trust fund
To use for art.
do a piece of art, whether it be purchase a piece of art or artists or what have you. And also, members of the public, I would suppose that we would want to allow them to possibly make application for funding. You know, like say for instance, if they're gonna do the art themselves, or what have you, or they're gonna hire an artist or what have you, they could possibly be eligible for funding out of that source. So it's either the city using the fundings to initiate and then to do the art, or a nonprofit, or just community in
Right.
general can have access to it. That's really the purpose of the trust fund. to make sure the money's there for the purchase and placement of art. That's a good idea. So I think we decided that we want to make sure that we control the number of murals and then for temporary murals, when in fact a temporary mural can be created and what duration they can stay in, and whatever blackout period, if any, that we have on a temporary mural. But the regular murals, we'll just regulate how many and not necessarily the content, but the type of murals. No, I'm just outlining what we have first, what we're working with first.
Mr. Mayor, just for a point of clarification as well, did you want on private businesses murals to be
So
or
far,
in
we're just
public?
talking about public.
Just clarify.
But if anyone is interested in private, if someone wants to do a private business, so I think we control it more if we decide to do it on public than on private.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, that's really the point I was making. If the council chooses to allow for murals on private property, say on commercial buildings, again, there, you would need to understand that there could be a proliferation of murals, all along Hawthorne Boulevard, and, is that what the council would like to see? So I'm not sure how or if we could limit murals if we were to allow them on commercial buildings. Greg, speak to that.
I would have to look into whether we could put down hard and fast limitations. I do think that Mr. Moore and I could work out some kind of limitations, like a mural could only be on a wall that doesn't have windows or doors on it, so that you're talking about a blank wall. Well, there aren't too many of those. That might be a natural limitation. Or a mural can't face Hawthorne Boulevard, it would have to face a side street. There are ways to go through it. So if you want us to look at limitations, Mr. Mayor, the first thing I'll do is to see whether we can just have numeric limitations, because that makes sense. But if that's not something we can do, then just by virtue of some of those, limiting the types of walls that are eligible, we might be able to do it that way. That might be a good way to do it without running afoul of the First Amendment. So we'll take a look at it if y'all give us direction, and that's certainly something I think that working together we can do. And it'll take a little bit of time, whether it's myself or Mr. Moore's staff kind of driving a little bit, thinking through what kind of limitations make sense given the walls and the private businesses that we have. What makes sense to meet your ultimate desire and direction to us, and then we'll go with that.
I guess we should decide so that you're not just all over the map investigating a whole bunch of stuff that we may or may not be interested in. Decide on the murals, do we want to at least have the staff to look into it? Not that we're adopting anything, because it's way early for that. But do we want them to at least look into it based on what Greg was just saying about, the city attorney was saying about at least looking into how you can regulate it if you decide to do it in terms of the numbers and stuff like that?
I'm okay with it.
I'm also okay with it. I have a feeling we'll have a limited amount of murals on Hawthorne.
And that's just
Yeah.
and that's just giving the authorization to look into, spend time looking into it. I mean, I don't know how I feel about the actual adoption. We'll see how that works. Is there anyone else?
So let's get a situation here. The Halloween store, 171st, they have a giant banner out there. We allow murals, they can do banners on each side of the wall because there's no windows in each on the north or the south side. But if you let that happen, can we restrict the banner being up?
So, as Mr. Murphy's pointed out, we have to be very careful because the signage, we have a sign program requirements on our city, so that's regulated separately. But the murals too, as Mr. Murphy's pointed out, we have to be very careful with too, especially on private property. So, and businesses. So, You guys could regulate, the council could regulate that on the north and south valley. You're talking 17,000, I believe, the property at 17,000 on Hoffman-Gorman, east side. That property there, they do have exposure on the north and south sides of the building, so the council could definitely regulate that. With concerns of banners and whatnot, that's a separate regulation under our signs.
Well, I don't want to, but it's only a 30-day thing, so Halloween's done all year long.
Yeah.
So that's like a bird it's saying, that can be put up in 30 days after Halloween, or November 1st it comes down. Because that's a temporary thing, correct? Is that what you're saying, Brandon?
Yeah, saying some of them temporary, then they have to come down after a certain amount of time.
I would just like to answer your question and say that I'm probably the conservative one up here. I'm not really pro murals, and especially on our boulevard. I would entertain the idea if there were the majority of the council wanted to look at it, I would look at it, but I appreciate what Greg was saying about figuring out where we could put it to limit it. Okay, but I'm not in favor of murals. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Ron.
And I'm with Rhonda too.
Yeah, well, and thank you for that. I'm not crazy about it, but I will say that I have seen in a few cities where they have 1 or 2 murals in the city, and if, at least in my opinion, I don't live there, that I had no problems with seeing it, like, oh, that's nice, or what have you, didn't have any problems. And just like I think one of the cities, matter of fact, Manhattan Beach, and there's not a whole bunch of murals in Manhattan Beach. There's only, actually, that's the only one I know of. So I've seen it work in some cities. How they regulate it to the fact that they only have that one, at least that I've seen, and, if I go through Manhattan Beach or whatever, I don't know, but I thought it was nice, and I've seen a couple other cities with, 1 or 2 murals. On the other hand, I've seen a couple of other cities that it's just terrible.
Yep.
Well, the murals are everywhere, and I don't know if those are well regulated. I don't know if those are sanctioned, or if somebody just decided to put them up in the city, just don't see them, or what have you, but there's a few cities like that as well, so I understand that as well. And it could be a case to where we decide not to do murals, permanent murals at all, and just do some temporary murals, allow only temporary murals. In that case, it'd be only up for like 30 days or what have you, and probably have to coincide with something or some reason to have. Like I could see like a holiday mural or what have you for 30 days or what have you, because then it's temporary and it's coincide with something. It's just not random, or what have you. Or if one of our teams, wins something prestigious and we want to do a mural for 30 days or what have you. I don't have any problem with that one at all because it's temporary. I do have some concerns, just like you, if we have a lot of murals around town, so it would have to be very regulated. But in order to get there, I need to see at least some of the information.
I agree, and I think we should look at it. Just my feeling is conservative.
Yes, I understand. I appreciate that. So, unless someone else have anything else on the mural or the permanent and temporary, maybe we go to the other items on here just to get kind of consensus. It sounds like we already had consensus for the utility boxes. Anybody like utility boxes?
I would be okay with utility boxes.
Okay, so they can look into utility boxes. Okay, what was the other topic?
The children thing?
Yeah, the child, yeah. I don't think anyone have any issue with, every once in a while having a child program.
A child program, one of the parts is
Yeah.
correct.
Child program, okay, we do child program. Okay, let's just go start the approval process. I guess this would be something for the staff to look into, the establishment of the approval process, more so flushing that part out. Anyone have any thoughts on the approval process? I think in some cases, somebody should look at and give a recommendation, whether it's a beautification committee or a subcommittee or someone should at least look at that before it goes to, not necessarily before it goes to staff, to give staff the recommendation.
I will play devil's advocate here, though. And this is something to consider, is if we allow murals, we also have to have city staff watch that. It's like garage sales or anything else. Somebody might come up and pay their fee, and we know that it's going up and we approve of it. But then 10 others suddenly appear because they see that the first one is, they don't know the process, and then whoops, there they all go. And so it's a policing issue. And I'm not necessarily sure that we want to take that on.
That's a very good point, ma'am, and it kind of circles back to the mayor's point earlier that you may decide that it's only worth it for you to allow them on public land and then not on private land, and which would then make it very easy for code staff to know that if it's on city land or Caltrans land or county-owned land, it's okay, and if it's on a private building, then it's going to be a code case. That you may want to go that way. That's something y'all can decide later after we've investigated what may work or may not for you.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
If we say no to mural at all, public or private, and we want Caltron to do a mural underneath the freeway or on the freeway, is that going to cause a problem?
Well, once again, I think he kind of outlined that if we limit it to a public,
But let's say
then
we
it's not.
but let's say we decide to have no public or private.
I think I know the answer, but
The answer, as it always is in a study session, is I'll look at it to be sure. But sort of my gut level legal answer is going to be tonight. If Caltrans owns the wall, they can probably put a mural on it anyway, but if they've rededicated the street back to us, or if we have an agreement that we're responsible for it, and our program says no murals, then we wouldn't be allowed to put it up.
Okay,
If that makes sense.
thank you.
so then that would provide the definition of a mural. Like, for instance, the bellflower, I wouldn't consider that a mural. Even though it's
Right.
Caltrans, I wouldn't consider that a mural. It is a painting, in fact, and, and it looks really nice, but I don't think that's a mural. I don't know. I'm not an art, professor or anything, so I don't know what the real definition. Would that be considered a mural? So I would think that we would still be able to do it if we did something similar to something similar to bellflower, because I don't think that's a mural.
It just depends on what we define as the mural.
Apparently bellflower is not a mural, so we could do that.
Right. The logo. It looks very nice. Okay, establishment of the approval process. We're working out that one. Any thoughts on the establishment of the approval process? Of course, we want to make it not too encumbersome and over bureaucratic as it states here. I agree with that.
I do like the idea, though, of having another body give recommendations or having some type of oversight, whether it's one of our commissions or committees.
Okay. You have any suggestions on that? Because we could either do, like in the policy, it's a beautification committee. I'm not necessarily 100% married to that, although that was the original proposal that's in the policy, or if it was a subcommittee.
Could we
Of this body,
do a subcommittee and have a few citizens? And,
No.
no,
Yeah, we shouldn't do that.
Okay.
If we have the citizens, they should be on their own, basically, But we could do a subcommittee of this body, or just have one of the existing committees, like the beautification committee, review it and make a recommendation.
I would still leave it beautification, and then they make a recommendation to us,
Yeah.
to Sean, and we can make the final decision.
Okay, then we make the final decision.
I agree with that. If they, yeah.
Okay, so we'll leave it with the beautification committee making the recommendation review and staff gives to the beautification committee, they'll make a recommendation and then we make the final determination. Okay, I agree with that. Okay, so that would be the establishment of the approval process. That's also the public involvement process as well. They are the public involvement, would be the public involvement.
Yes, whatever notifications would be developed, the public would be notified. Typically when a process of art applications, you put out a notice in the paper and something on the internet.
Okay. We just talked about dissatisfaction of some community members, okay, difficulty in developing various types of public art, okay, we talked about that. The children's art, yes, constitutional restraints, we talked about that, limitation, limiting the areas of placement of art, we talked about that. Is there any other thing we need to talk about on the arts?
When, I have a question. When let's say a piece of art gets graffiti, if it's in public area, we are responsible for the cleaning of that. How do we work on that? Because I don't want a piece of art to have like a red paint from Public Works or gray paint. Is that something we would have to discuss, or how would
Typically, you develop art to be some way to remove graffiti, an easy way, some type of materials that are employed to be anti-graffiti type materials and metals and stuff that we can, take it off with a remover, with a solvents or things like that. Typically, I've seen happen on the metal ones, and then more, and then with the statue type ones that I've worked on, you have to use different materials and try to blend it, grind it off, or whatever. Definitely, we already have a graffiti removal program, but we definitely would have to work with the Public Works and the city manager's office to, remediate the graffiti. It's not as easy as removing graffiti on a building, definitely.
Right. I just don't want to have a piece of art with a gray stripe in the middle of it because we didn't have time to come back and do a touch-up.
Right. The one thing that I did see is challenging, and when they etch in it, that's where we run into, we could damage the art when they etch in it or put some kind of etching or carve it into the art.
Okay.
Yeah, that would be a very difficult situation. I mean, it would be heartbreaking, right, if we or some other group put up a mural or some type of public art, and then it was vandalized and graffitied, and there was no way to, properly remove that graffiti, and it would damage the art. It might have to be just completely painted over and start over. But as Sean was mentioning, there are, anti-graffiti type coatings that you can put on things like murals, where if somebody were to go and graffiti that art, it makes it easier for that paint to be removed. It's not a perfect solution, I don't think, but I think it's helpful. And it could help to save the art it could help to save it. Maybe it might be, a bit, stained, but it would be helpful. So we would try to do our best to try to preserve public art if it was in place.
Yeah, it certainly could be opened up for graffiti and other acts of vandalism. But a lot of times it doesn't really happen. Well, I can't say really, it doesn't really happen. It happens sometimes, but it doesn't happen as often. Case in point is the mural that Pat Curry was talking about that you may or may not know about. Prior to that mural being placed there, almost every week that wall would be hit with graffiti. And it has not since that mural has been there. And it's been at least, a year, maybe a little longer than a year, since that mural has been there. But almost every week that wall would be hit with graffiti. And so the staff is constantly out there painting on the wall and sometimes not so nice, designs, if you will, images or what have you. So in some regards, people respect the artwork, not as fast to graffiti, especially if they were involved some kind of way. I know someone that was involved. It was a
truly a piece of community, art, they tend to not vandalize them as they probably otherwise would. But it's certainly happened.
And Mr. Mayor, to that point, I think there are studies that have shown that in places where there is public art, it's shown that there's, less instances of vandalism and graffiti, because like you say, they respect it, or, they'll just find another place.
Okay, so anything else on the public arts program? Make sure the staff have enough direction to go in.
Yes, I think we've got a fair amount of direction here, and we'll take that. And you were bringing up how this is very preliminary. This is just about getting input, and I just wanted to let the council know that I'm going to have some more talks with Sean and with the city attorney. But what we will probably try to do is take the input that we received tonight, come back and put together a preliminary policy or ordinance, and we'll bring it back to the council just to make sure that we're on the right track, and then get further input from the council. And then once we get that far, we'll then take that preliminary ordinance or policy, and then we'll move forward to the Planning Commission and have them review it, and then have them give their recommendation, and then we'll bring it back one last time to the council for your review and approval.
And exactly what would the Planning Commission, what role would they have?
Well,
Honestly, probably very little, except that if this requires any changes to the zoning code, because we do move forward with anything on private property, then the Planning Commission, as you all know, has to review and make a recommendation on any change to the zoning code. Other than that, they probably won't have much of a role at all, but if the legal technicalities require, then we will follow them, sir.
Okay, thank you, sir. Okay, with that, I think we're pretty much finished with the arts and public places program. I want to thank the staff for putting together the report and the presentation. Thank you, gentlemen and ladies. Let's move on to our next item. The next item on the agenda had to do with the public walkways. Let's have the staff report. Who's going to give this report?
Good evening. Good evening, Honorable Mayor, member of the council. This evening, staff would like to provide you some background information on the current parkway design policy, and request some directions and guidance to any revisions to the policy that we're about to make. City Council adopted the current parkway design policy back in February 2018. And then in July of last year, Council also revised the policy to include a contractor requirements and the landscape height limitation portion. Current parkway design policy follows a low impact development design approach, which is to minimize the hardscape and to increase the landscape to extent possible. The policy follows the two design options. One is a walkable, and the other one is a non-walkable options. The walkable option is the basic, requires a minimal maintenance, no public works permits, require a 75% landscaping. The non-walkable option is a little more complex. It requires a little more guidance. The option requires a submittal of a little sketch for the conditional public works permit, and also, again, 75% of the live landscape coverage. The landscape ground options are limited in order to maintain some of the levels of the neighborhood consistency. What's not currently allowed are followings: hardscape over 25%, so 75% has to be vegetation. We do not allow sharp edge vegetations. We also do not allow pebbles, rocks, barks, and any structures, and also ground cover over 12 inches. To encourage the residents to improve and maintain the parkway, the city council may need to consider revising the parkway design policy, but with some factors in mind. Number one is that climate change and also the drought condition. As you know, that we are in a severe, California is in severe drought condition, and not only the water supply is limited, and as you heard from Golden State Water presentation, that it is not getting better as far as water supplies. The other one is socioeconomic and cost factor. As the water supply gets reduced, the cost for the water will be higher for the irrigation for the parkway. And then also possibly considering the non-traditional materials like DG or decorative paving or permeable hardscapes are some of the options that the council may consider. And then the last one is changing the parkway improvement approval process. Right now, it is very simple conditional public works permit that is required for just the non-walkable option, but make it easier for the approval process. So those four things are what the staff recommends the council to consider. So with that, staff would like to open up to council for any direction that we can provide. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that staff report. Anyone willing to speak on this item? No, you may have. Go ahead.
I understand all the items that restrict, like that, the bevel and stuff, but my suggestion is, let's keep the 6-inch plants, but I would like to see the city have the owner or the renter owner of the property sign a waiver, not holding the city liable for any damage if they decide to go with pebbles and rocks. Let's turn the ownership over to the owners, or and if it's a renter, they have to get the permission from the owner before they do any landscaping on the parkway. I take care of mine, and when I first bought my house, I thought it was mine. And I said, I'll be going to hell, it belongs to the city, why am I taking care of it? Well, I think if we put a waiver in place, I think renters would be more inclined not to do it because they don't want to get the owner involved. But the owner, like myself, like Rhonda, like most of it, sign off on it and say, if you decide to go against what we're saying, you're held liable, not the city. I talked to Greg about it.
And I'm happy to look at that. I don't know that program's been done, but I'm happy to look at it. And I'm also happy to look at just generally, since the property owners are responsible for maintenance in general per ordinance, is that necessary, or is that something where the liability would already be on them? I think no matter what the case is, we'll take a look at that and we'll bring it back to you so that you have a really clear idea of what the city's liability is, what the property's liability is, and whether we can shift it. And I'm happy to do that.
Can I also piggyback on what Pat just brought up? In that same vein, I think also there needs to be something written about the care of the parkways being the responsibility, that it is not the city's, for weeds, for the mess that we're seeing out there that we all have to step through. We have plenty of cars that are parking on our streets, and sometimes you don't even want to get out on the passenger side because of the mess. So in that same vein, Greg, I would ask that it be written in such a way that the upkeep is also addressed.
Yes, ma'am, and your policy currently is written that way, but in working with Mr. Lee and Mr. Moore, we'll take a look at the ordinance and make sure that that is shifted to the adjacent private property.
Yeah, like for instance, it says that what is not currently permitted. It talks about vegetation taller than 12 inches. And Kevin and I spoke about this last week, and just the other day I was out riding my bicycle. And when I tell you there's some many trees out in the parkway. It's tall. You're right. You can't get out. If you're on the passenger side, and some of them are spilling over over to the curb. Some of them actually look pretty nice, but they're still too tall, you know. But that's what's not currently permitted, so those are in violation of the ordinance as we speak now. So I guess we want to decide how we want to change the ordinance. Let's hear from Councilwoman Suarez. Did you have any input, or was that Cuevas?
I would like, the only thing I don't like are the little pebbles, because I know that the kids walking to and from school are going to be picking those up and throwing it to each other. I'm okay with any other, little cement or pavers or probably up to 75% of that, but I would like to see at least 25% of tolerant plants, something green, because just all mulch or cement doesn't look that great, but a little bit of green would be nice.
And then I have
Yes,
a
ma'am.
comment. If we set the guidelines for, this is currently allowed, this is currently not allowed, this and this, do we need a permit for the residents? I mean, can they just, as long as they're within the guidelines and follow it, do we have to have Public Works check? I mean, obviously, if they see that it's not in compliance, then, you get ticketed or whatever, but I don't know, do we need them to submit a sketch and all that? I just feel like it's such a little patch that to me it seems a little excessive, but then again, people do a lot of things, so.
Well, I could try to address that. So, when we develop the new policy or ordinance, we can certainly look at some options for how we go about that. But it might be advisable where we try to make it as simple as possible, where we only require a permit or a contractor for instances where there's significant construction that might need to take place. So, for example, we brought this. Robert and I mentioned this or talked about this. If a water main were damaged, and that runs through the parkway, and that would require a plumber to come in and dig down 6 feet, in order to repair that main or whatever that might be. That might be an example of significant construction which would require a permit. I don't know, maybe even an encroachment permit in order to do work in the public right-of-way. But for maybe smaller type improvements, just general landscaping, some hardscape, pavers, that sort of thing. Maybe that wouldn't trigger a contractor or a permit, but we can look further at that and then come back to you with a recommendation.
Yeah, I definitely would agree. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Anything you want to? Yeah, I would definitely would say that. I agree. Unless you tap into the water line, there's no reason to have to have a contractor, because a lot of this work, the occupants do themselves, and to have to pay a contractor to do this work where you can do yourself is totally. I don't think it's appropriate. Unless, like I said, they're digging down and and possibly could break the water line or something like that. Then yeah, I get that. Contractors would be more trained to do such, and they'd be licensed and bonded in case something happened, and to make the city whole. But the residents shouldn't have to do that if they're not doing that type of work.
And just sort of my personal take on it is, if the more difficult it is for our residents to improve their parkways and improve the look of the neighborhood, work just may not be done. Improvements we may discourage improvements from being done. So if it's simpler and doesn't require a permit, that might encourage improvements. So.
I will.
What else we want to do with this policy? Anyone else have it? Anything? Are there any other items that the staff want us to address on this, or that we haven't touched on?
One of the things that we don't require, allow is a hardscape over 25% of coverage. So 75% has to be vegetation, mostly because of the need of the permeable space. But also you could look into option of I know that DG is not what you prefer, but some kind of a non-traditional materials that could be used, that could be permeable, but it's not a vegetation. Mulch is an option. I know some people don't like mulch, but also permeable paver, which is a hardscape, but does have the water get recharged onto the ground. So those are some of the options that the council may want to consider. Because again, right now, 75% has to be vegetation, and that very often limits a lot of the opportunity. For example, I know that MWD has a program where you remove a grass and then put in a drought-tolerant plants plus the and design. But a lot of those are limited because of the fact that we need to put back 75% of the vegetation. So that's one thing that I would
Yes, ma'am.
have to consider.
What would be a more reasonable percentage, would you think, than the 75%?
Again, that's the council's consideration, again, because it is, I think it is a mixture of permeable materials that if you could use, and you could keep it at 75%, but if you use some portion of that, so for example, 25% of it be allowable for permeable materials, then the residents who needs to improve the parkway only needs to do 50% of the vegetational plants, and then they have more option on the other materials. So again, it is very flexible whether you can make it the percentile of vegetation or percentile of permeable spaces or coverages. So again, you have a lot of flexibility in that.
Yeah, and to Shirley, Councilmember Cuevas' point about your thought about 75% pavers or hardscape and 25% plants. Perhaps that could be something we could look at. If the 75%, if that was hardscape, as long as it's permeable, then that could be something that would be workable.
That will allow you to get there's some funds out there from the water company that if you switch or if you cut down on your greens, you're able to get some type of funds. I can't remember what
Correct.
it is.
MWD
I got something in the mail for it.
Correct.
Yeah.
MWD has the turf removal
There you
program
go.
where they give, I do believe, somewhere between $2 and $3 per square foot.
Yeah.
What you could do is you could use that fund. So as you remove it, you get that fund back from the MWD, and some of the residences could utilize that. A lot of the other cities does that. However, because of for City of Lawndale is little limited because of that, because again, the 75% has to go back into vegetation, whereas the requirements needs to be much less than that, and also it requires a lot of other things such as capturing the stormwater or permeable areas and all that and stuff. So you're right, that program is private, is limited in this in the city.
I'm okay with that, because the whole idea is to make sure that it's able to recharge, rather than, any particular way, right? So long as you still reach your goal is to recharge the water, so it's okay with that fancy word you use.
Permanent.
Which means recharge, water to recharge, I'm okay with that.
I'm okay with it, but can you include, if you do give a list of those permeable whatever, what have you.
Materials.
If you could include photos so I can, or during the presentation so you can see what it looks like.
I do have a question.
Yes, sir.
If we reduce the greenage, all we're gonna have is hardscape out there, 2 plants in hardscape. This is the city of Lawndale, not Cement City. Right? Pavers are expensive, let me tell you, pavers are expensive. Most people won't use pavers, because it costs an arm and a leg. I did my house, and I had to sell 2 of my grandchildren to pay for it. I'm okay at 50-50, or 60-40, but 25% green space, no. I don't want, like your dad would say, concrete city. And so I like to see either 60-40, I'll go as low as 50-50, but not 25-75, no.
Yeah, I mean, 50-50 is good. I mean, I think that's what Councilman Suarez would like to see, some of the material, because I'm not that familiar with them, and so, I know you don't want it to look all like what we vision concrete to look like. But if they do have some material that looks like, maybe they're brown or whatever, so it looks more like earth or what have you, then it won't look like it's just concrete just everywhere. And so I don't know what they all look like, in terms of the different types of materials. So that is a good point, because that Councilman Suarez pointed out, you can kind of look at the material. I think might be okay. But 50-50 is okay for me.
Well, we're not.
Especially if the other 50 don't necessarily look like cement.
Yeah, and we're not deciding tonight, right? We're just looking at, we can play around with the percentages.
Yeah.
I think visual, I'm with Bernadette. Let's be visual on it so we can see it.
What the staff could do is bring back some pictures of what the 50% would look like, and versus what 25% will look like. And I do agree, 25% is very, very lacking, and with the 50%, I think there's other options that you could consider. So staff will bring back some photos of what's out there.
Are they able to qualify for the reimbursement?
Yes, I think we need to look at that a bit more closely. So I think with 50%, I think it is possible. Because a lot of cities do have 50% as their minimum requirement for stations. So our staff will look into that.
Okay.
Anything else we should look at on this item?
Mr. Mayor, I was just going to mention that we would have a similar process as with the public arts program, where based on the input that we received tonight from all of you, we will go back and begin to put together a preliminary ordinance, and then we'll bring it back for some further input from the council, and then probably we'll have to also take this item to the Planning Commission for the same reasons. And then they'll do their work, and then we'll bring it back to the council for final approval.
Okay.
Okay.
Anything else? Okay, with that, we have...
I have a question.
Yes,
It's
ma'am.
not
Go
related
ahead.
to any of these, but we usually have items from council members, or I don't know if it's because it's a special meeting that wasn't included.
No, it's on there. I just, because we didn't, oh, you know what? Yeah, you're right. I was thinking of comments, but if you'd like to add, if you want to say anything, yes, you can do that.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, because at the last meeting, I think there was some confusion, so I just wanted to ask City Clerk if they could agendize a certain item for discussion. I'd like to agendize resolution number CC-1811-046 regarding the purchasing policy. I don't know if I need any,
Will that be in the next meeting you're asking for?
Oh, the next minute.
the next regular, I guess, is fine, yeah.
So that would be for this
For
coming
Monday?
Monday?
Yeah,
Okay.
And just to clarify, this is a general discussion.
General discussion, yes.
Okay, so that'll be the order. Okay. With that, unless someone else has anything they want to add, we won't go down the road.
I have a question.
Oh, yes, sir, go ahead.
Sure. Councilwoman Cuevas, these green things you're talking about,
What green thing?
you know, on the parkway?
Yeah.
Did you go to some kind of thing in Sacramento, kind of meeting? They gave you a munchie bag? What kind of green things are you talking about?
They did give me a munchie bag, but it wasn't that green.
You said, you know, green stuff out in the parkway.
I'm all like, what is
You little
going?
you little stand up and sell it?
Yeah, it wasn't
It's
green.
legal.
It wasn't green, it was brown.
It was chewable.
All right, the next regularly scheduled meeting of Lawndale City Council will be held at 6:30 p.m. Monday, October the 4th. In these here chambers, it's now 7:47. This meeting is adjourned.